The Business Blackbook, the Fyre Festival Fraud. This is the Business Blackbook, where billion-dollar empires are built and collapse. 26 years old. That is how old Billy McFarland was when he convinced some of the most powerful investors on the planet, the most famous supermodels in the world, and over 5,000 paying customers, that he had built the greatest music festival experience in human history on a private island in the Bahamas with gourmet chefs, luxury villas, crystal blue water, and an A-list lineup that would make Coachella look like a garage sale. He had none of it. Not the island, not the villas, not the chefs, not the infrastructure, not even the permits. What he did have was a smartphone, a pitch deck, and an almost supernatural ability to make people believe that the future was already built, when in reality, not a single brick had been laid. This is not a story about a festival that went wrong. This is a story about a con dressed in linen pants and a wristband. This is the story of how one man weaponized the most powerful drug of the 21st century. FOMO, the fear of missing out, and sold it to the world at prices ranging from $1,500 all the way to $250,000 per package, and walked away, leaving thousands of people stranded on a half-built construction site, eating cheese sandwiches in the rain. Open the ledger. On the very first page of Billy McFarland's Black Book, we find the ingredient that every great con artist uses before anything else: legitimacy. Before Fyre Festival, Billy McFarland had already built a company called mattresses. It was a sleek black metal credit card marketed to young, ambitious millennials in New York City. The pitch was simple: pay us $250 a year, and we will give you access to exclusive events, concert tickets, restaurant reservations, and networking with the city's elite. It sounded incredible, and for a while, it looked incredible. McFarland threw parties. He put his members in velvet rope venues. He got press coverage in Forbes and Business Insider. He was photographed next to celebrities. But behind the curtain, the business was already bleeding. Magnus's was essentially reselling event tickets at a loss, giving members more value than the company was actually collecting. The financials were a fiction. But to the outside world, Billy McFarland was a 20-something genius, a visionary, a disruptor, and that reputation, that carefully constructed illusion of legitimacy, was the first entry in his Black Book. Because when you need people to believe your next lie, you need them to already believe in you. Now we turn to page 2. And this is where the architecture of the fraud truly begins. In late 2016, McFarland partnered with rapper and cultural icon Ja Rule, and together they conceived of Fyre Festival. The concept was this: a luxury music festival held on a private island in the exumous Bahamas, the island they initially claimed to be using Pablo Escobar's private island. Let that sink in for a moment. Had not been started. Page 17 of the Black Book carries a note that every con artist knows by heart, and every victim never reads until it is too late. Sell the dream, build the dream later. McFarland and his team began selling tickets in January of 2017. The festival was scheduled for late April, giving them less than 4 months to build luxury accommodation, stage infrastructure, catering operations, transportation logistics, and security systems on a remote island with virtually no existing utility connections. The island they eventually settled on, after losing the rights to the Escobar property, was Norman's Cay, a stretch of land with limited fresh water access. No adequate port for mass cargo delivery, no established roads, no power grid sufficient for a large-scale event. Their own production team was sounding alarms from day one. Andy King, the veteran event producer McFarland, brought in to help execute the festival, later described the experience as watching someone announce a mission to the moon without a rocket. Internal emails that would later surface in court documents showed production staff writing things like, "We are selling a dream to people, and we don't have the things we need to execute it." McFarland's response to these warnings: he told them to figure it out, because in his Black Book, there was a chapter that overrode all operational reality. And that chapter was called Other People's Money. Flip to page 23, and we enter the darkest section of the ledger. McFarland raised approximately $26 million from investors to fund Fyre Festival. Names like Comcast Ventures had invested in his mattresses venture. New backers were brought in based on financial projections that painted Fyre as a revolutionary new platform, not just a festival, but a talent booking app that would disrupt the entire live events industry. The pitch to investors included revenue projections that would later be described by prosecutors as completely fabricated. Internal documents showed that McFarland had falsified financial statements for mattresses, inflating the company's value to attract capital. They were not just selling a festival, they were selling a mythology. The ghost of the world's most infamous drug lord, Crystal, Caribbean Waters, and the hottest musical acts alive, all wrapped up in a single weekend experience. The marketing campaign they launched in December of 2016 was, by every metric, a masterpiece of manipulation. They hired over 400 Instagram influencers, including names like Kendall Jenner, Bella Hadid, Emily Ratajkowski, and Hailey Baldwin, to post a single orange tile to their social media profiles simultaneously. No caption, no explanation, just orange. The internet exploded within 24 hours. The speculation alone had generated more buzz than most festivals generate in an entire marketing cycle. Then came the official video. Supermodels running on white sand beaches, private jets, yachts, fire, music, champagne, laughter. The kind of imagery that makes you feel like you are watching someone else's perfect life and you desperately need to be in it. The promotional video cost $100,000 to produce. The festival infrastructure so socially validated that rational judgment simply dissolved. This is the power of manufactured desire. When enough beautiful, wealthy, aspirational people are visibly excited about something, the human brain stops asking, "Is this real?" and starts asking, "How do I get in?" The ink began to smudge in March of 2017. With less than 60 days until the festival, the production team was facing catastrophic shortages. They had almost no working accommodation on the island. The luxury villas McFarland had advertised were, in reality, FEMA-style disaster relief tents repurposed and assembled hastily on an uneven field. The catering infrastructure didn't exist. The headlining artists, including Blink 182, were beginning to pull out. The private jet transfers promised to ticket holders were nowhere in the budget. The stages weren't built. The medical facilities weren't established. The port couldn't handle the cargo volume needed to even attempt a workable setup. In an internal company meeting that would later be described by multiple attendees, McFarland was told directly and unambiguously, "We cannot do this. We need to postpone or cancel." His response? He told them to keep going because canceling meant refunding, and refunding meant the money was gone. And Billy McFarland, by this point, didn't have it anymore. Here is where the Black Book reveals its most chilling entry, a section that every Ponzi scheme, every failed venture, every fraudulent empire eventually reaches. The chapter titled, "There is no exit, only delay." McFarland knew by early April that the festival could not happen as advertised. His team knew. His production partners knew. Even some of his closest associates knew. But instead of issuing refunds, instead of making a public announcement, instead of doing the one ethical thing available to him at that moment, Billy McFarland sent his marketing team to post more promotional content, more influencer posts, more hype, more "see you on the island" messaging, because in the con artist's ledger, there is always one more move before the collapse, one more round of capital to raise. The staff, many of whom had not been paid in weeks, began to simply disappear. People who had paid $2,000, $10,000, in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars, were sleeping on disaster relief cots in a field in the Bahamas without food, water, or a reliable way home. The outrage was immediate and global. Within 12 hours, Fyre Festival had become the most talked about disaster in internet history. 2 Netflix documentaries would be made about it. Careers were damaged. Lawsuits were filed in every direction. And Billy McFarland? He spent the next several weeks attempting to relaunch Fyre Festival. He began soliciting new investors, collecting new deposits, pitching a Fyre Festival 2, telling anyone who would listen that the first event was simply a logistical setback and that the real vision was still alive. He raised close to $1 million in new investments from people who impossibly still believed him. This is the anatomy of a true fraudster. One more delay. One more story to tell. The show must go on. Not because the show can go on, but because stopping the show means the truth comes out. And then April 27th, 2017 arrived. Thousands of ticket holders flew into the Bahamas. Hundreds more were still mid-flight when the first images started appearing on social media. Not images of crystal waters and luxury villas. Soggy mattresses half inside waterlogged tents. Cheese sandwiches in styrofoam containers. Photographed by a ticket holder and posted online with the caption, "This is the gourmet dining experience at Fyre Festival." The image went viral within minutes. What followed was one of the most documented public implosions in the history of live events. Thousands of people stranded at an airport with nowhere to go. Luggage lost or piled in open fields with no security. No running water in some areas, no working medical teams, no transportation back to civilization for hours, in some cases, days. The headliners never arrived. The stages sat incomplete. The same patterns of fraud, inflated numbers, fabricated revenue, falsified investor documents, would become the skeleton of every financial crime he committed afterward. He was not building a company. He was building a story. And the story had a very specific audience. People with enough money to buy in and enough ego to believe they had found something others hadn't. Tickets for Fyre Festival ranged from $1,500 for a general admission package all the way to $250,000 for a so-called artist package, which promised private villa access, a dedicated chef, and VIP everything. Several of those $250,000 packages were sold. Think about that number for a moment. $250,000 for a festival that was being planned in real time by people who had no festival experience on an island that had no infrastructure in a timeline that every expert said was impossible. But the influencer campaign had worked too well. Demand was so high, so loud. It is not the first crime that defines them. It is the fact that, even as the walls are caving in, they are already writing the next chapter. Cool. In June of 2018, Billy McFarland was arrested. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud. In October of 2018, he was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison and ordered to forfeit $26 million. The approximate amount defrauded from investors. Civil lawsuits filed by ticket holders and vendors totaled over $100 million in claimed damages. Local workers in the Bahamas who had been hired to help build the festival, many of them from low-income backgrounds, were never fully paid for their labor. Yarul, for his part, distanced himself from the fraud allegations, insisting he too was deceived by McFarland about the state of the event's preparations. Whether that is entirely true is a question the Black Book leaves deliberately unanswered. What is answered is this. Fyre Festival was never a festival that failed. It was a fraud that was always going to collapse. The only variable was when. From the moment those orange tiles appeared on the internet, from the moment the first ticket was sold on a projection that was never real, the outcome was written. The tents were always going to be soggy. The food was always going to be cold. The planes were always going to be late. Because you cannot build a castle in the sky and charge people to live in it. Eventually, gravity wins. So what does the Black Book teach us? It teaches us that the most dangerous frauds are not the ones built on obvious lies. They are the ones built on beautiful ones. Billy McFarland did not sell people a bad product. He sold them a feeling. The feeling of being special, of being chosen, of being the kind of person who gets to stand on a private island in the Bahamas while the rest of the world watches from their phones. He understood something deeply true about modern human psychology. That status is more intoxicating than almost anything else. and that in the age of social media, the appearance of status can be manufactured, packaged, and sold at extraordinary margins. The investors who lost millions were not stupid. The ticket holders who paid premium prices were not gullible. They were human. And humans, when presented with a sufficiently beautiful lie, told by a sufficiently confident liar, surrounded by sufficiently aspirational imagery, will suspend disbelief every single time. That is not a weakness. That is just how we are built. The Black Book's lesson is not be more skeptical. The lesson is always look for the infrastructure behind the dream. Before you invest in the vision, ask to see the foundation. Before you buy the ticket, ask to see the tent. Before you trust the pitch, ask to see the books. Because every great fraud in history has had one thing in common. The dream was spectacular, and the books were blank. And with that, the Black Book closes. Subscribe, and we will open the next page soon.